Hi, let's talk about the test prep classroom and some important facts about standardized testing. As with the test prep strategies, you may wish to inform your students about some of this history. I find it's useful just to keep students aware of how we think about test prep and how we understand the way the process works. So, at AEI, we strive to keep our lessons dynamic and engaging. The IEP has a host of pedagogical tools and requirements at the school, but many of these tools also apply to test preparation. So, this includes using PPP, especially for grammar, the 5-step writing process, listening and speaking without books, and reading for comprehension. However, every test is unique and requires instructor creativity to adapt AEI pedagogy to the given test. Excuse me. In the classroom, test preparation involves less lecture and more drills, particularly with regard to the vocabulary based questions and math portions of some tests. However, endless drills are exhausting for students and instructors, so as such, test prep instructional time should mix lecture with practice and production, the drills. A good way to do this is to use the PPP method associated with grammar pedagogy. First, presentation, you present the material in about 10 to 15 minutes, and then you have the students practice together for about 20 minutes or so. Finally, having the students produce their own lessons individually or in large group for the end of every hour. Be sure to use AEI vocabulary pedagogy to enrich student learning of test specific and subject specific terminology using Quizlet. It must be emphasized a test preparation instructor cannot simply tell the students that their answers are wrong. Instead, you need to model the strategies recommended for each question type, such as choose your own word for the fill in the blank type questions of sentence equivalence and text completion, or mapping the passage for all reading comprehension and critical thinking questions. Back solving in most math problems is going to be very useful and so forth. You need to walk through the strategy for that question type and tell the students why each of the incorrect answers are problematic and how to find the correct answer. Even on reading comprehension, these questions are not subjective. The instructor needs to present how the test maker creates those questions and their wrong answers so that the students can become more adept at recognizing trap answers and avoiding them. So this is why we go into some of the facts about the history of standardized testing, who makes and uses the standardized tests, and general standardized test preparation. So the history is that standardized tests are very loosely based on the IQ tests originally developed to tell the difference between officers and infantry in the military. After failures of command during the World Wars, military intelligence developed the IQ, or intelligence quotient test, to try to sort the average individual into the infantry and the exceptional individual into command. Questions that are easy should have been answerable by everyone, whereas questions that were difficult should have been answerable only by the very intelligent and therefore presumably those who should be commanders. Although we may find in our experience that sometimes smarter people don't make the best leaders. Sometimes they do. It's not really an easy thing to measure just based on one factor like intelligence. However, where IQ tests are theoretically supposed to measure innate abilities, and they don't, it turns out. They're deeply, deeply flawed and based on numerous assumptions. But they were supposed to measure those innate abilities. However, by contrast, the standardized test for a university program is supposed to measure acquired skills. So these will include skills in language areas, things like your ability to listen and take notes, to speak clearly and persuasively, to write argumentatively, to have correct grammar and use and identify correct vocabulary for your language equivalency exams, that's TOEFL and IELTS, as well as math areas for the quantitative sections of graduate program exams like the GRE and GMAT. On the other hand, none of these tests really measures how well a person communicates or thinks outside of the testing environment. And that's why people do get test anxiety, is it's an unusual, very stressful environment. So in fact, the vast majority of the skills tested on these exams are not assessed in ways that are really representative of academic or professional use. And in reality, the tests measure a single skill, which is your ability to take a standardized test. This is why we try to teach our test prep students to try to think like the test maker and the test grader in order to better understand the exams. So who is it that actually makes grades and uses the tests? Well, schools are the people we think of as using the tests, right? They use the test results to distinguish between applicants with very similar GPAs. A high GPA tends to indicate somebody is a very hard worker, while a high test score tends to indicate somebody with a lot of skills that are necessary for the school program. In addition to the scaled score, you also have that percentile ranking, which further differentiates between our highest scoring tests. Inevitably, most universities want somebody who has a high GPA more than they want somebody with a high test score, unless they have a bunch of people with identical GPAs or grade point averages. So if I have two people who have very similar grade point averages and one of them tests well and the other one doesn't, I might go with the person with the lower test score because they've proven that they're going to outlast the DWF rate, the drop, withdrawal, failure rate. And universities want to prevent drop, withdrawal, and failure because it means loss of money. Now, who actually makes the test? That would be the Educational Testing Service for the GRE, and the Graduate Management Admissions Council for the GMAT. Cambridge publishes the C1 Business Hire Test, etc. Those are your test makers. They're corporations. How do they make their money? Who are their primary customers? The admissions departments and mailing lists. The people who actually give test makers the most money are advertisers looking for people to add for their contact lists. So this includes universities, but it also includes academic preparation companies, publishers, and other corporations. Even though test takers pay what seems to be a lot of money to take the test, it's actually a drop in the bucket compared to the advertiser's budget. Then, as far as the test writers and graders, mostly grad students. Computers grade the multiple choice sections of the test, and graduate students, people who are working on their master's degrees or their PhDs, are hired en masse to grade essays in large blocks, usually over a weekend in a hotel conference center. They're usually instructed to spend no more than about 2 minutes per essay, following a relatively simple checklist, and our essay rubric is patterned off of the listed requirements that would be on such a checklist. Our templates are built to meet those specific requirements. That looks like a typo. All right, so the generalized approach to standardized test preparation is first to have a strategic plan. Given a deadline for submitting test scores to your graduate program, students should carefully plan their test preparation experience to cover all areas prior to the scheduled exam. AEI recommends that students take the full set of courses for their exam, whether both TOEFL 1 and 2, IELTS 1 and 2, or GRE Verbal 1 and 2 plus Math 1 and 2, or GMAT Verbal 1 and 2 plus Math 1 and 2. Some students may find it beneficial to repeat one or more of these courses, particularly in C1 Business Hire, which recently rebranded from BEC Hire. Other parts of the good strategic plan include regular lab practice, as well as the use of flashcards or other memory aids outside of study time. Students That's just the first part. The second part of good standardized prep is to practice regularly and methodically. Cramming is actually harmful. An all-nighter will make you more tired, which means you will make more small mistakes, forget what you already knew, and forget what you tried to learn, as well as just answering more slowly in general. And the test makers cannot tell the difference between a small or a large mistake. They'll just see that you have gotten the answer wrong. Take simulated tests on the computer for the GRE. This includes the Power Prep. Other websites offer simulations of other exams. Remember to pick the order with the easy test first, not to approach it like a fact-based test, and to learn to think like the test maker. I'm doing this a little bit more quickly because I don't want to go over my 15-minute limit. So I'll just say, remember that the test has to be predictable. This means you can improve your test-taking strategies. The test uses the same principles for every test taker, and the changes have to be normed through exhaustive repetition over random groups. So it is a coachable test. Every standardized test is. So the last 4 minutes, note an adaptive test will start at the medium difficulty level, and depending on the course of each section, depending on the test, it may be adaptive over sections or between sections. So review the specific exam to see what it says about where the adaptations take place. But as a general rule, do not guess repeatedly or your score will drop dramatically. There is not a one-to-one correspondence between right and wrong answer and changes in the difficulty level, and it's not possible to know for sure which way your difficulty level has changed. So don't worry about trying to figure it out. Take heart if all of a sudden the questions do seem more difficult, and remember to answer every question. A blank answer is the same thing as a wrong answer. Always at least take a guess. Be sure to pace yourself. Usually it's about 2 minutes per question, and try to practice at higher difficulty levels than your current level in order to improve. Make educated guesses through process of elimination. Don't just guess C or the longest answer. Always check your answers before you hit submit. And remember that the two different parts of the test, quantitative and verbal, do not typically affect each other. I want to say before I close out, tell the students never to cancel their scores before they see them. This is because, number one, they paid a lot of money to take that test, and number two, they will never know if they did poorly or well if they just cancel it based on a bad feeling. So encourage the students to find out what their score was and not to cancel. I will stop this video now and come back. I think the next thing is to talk in more detail about the GRE and GMAT exams.